Another one that you were the first person I ever heard talk about this is that you said something along the lines of, you said creatine can actually make you smarter and that people aren't taking enough creatine for it to be effective. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I became really interested in creatine a few years ago when I started getting serious about resistance training. And so I was looking into the studies and said, okay, what dose do I need to take for muscle, right? I wanted to basically what creatine is doing. So creatine is stored as phosphatidylcholine. It's basically helps your body make energy and replace the energy quicker, right? So you're making energy quicker. And so when you're working out, you're using a lot of energy. And so you want to replace that energy quick, right? And so what creatine does is it increases your exercise volume so you can do more work. It's not growing your muscles bigger like protein does, right? It's just you can do more work, and that work that you're doing can then increase your muscle mass and strength, right? And so it turns out that every study that I came across, it was like 5 grams a day was really essential for, that was like the limit for muscle. Like once you reach that 5 grams, over the course of about 3 to 4 weeks, you saturate your muscles. Now, you might remember some of these studies back in the day. They do these loading studies. They load you up with 20 grams, and then they give you the 5 because the studies aren't going to be 3 to 4 weeks long. But if you're just a normal everyday person taking 5 grams a day and you've been doing that for 3 to 4 weeks, your muscles are saturated, meaning like they've gotten all they can take in. And so that's where I was at. I was taking 5 grams a day. And then I started to really come across these studies that would, talk about creatine going into the brain. Creatine seems to be helping with, sleep deprivation. And then it was like, what is going on? So I started to dive into this research. And then I had Dr. Darren Kando on my podcast. He's a pretty great researcher at the University of Regina in Canada. And I dove in, and it was very clear that creatine is not only important for energy, replacing energy in the muscles, it's doing it in other tissues as well, including the brain. And so what studies have found is that muscles are very greedy. And when you take in 5 grams, that 5 grams is predominantly going into your muscle, particularly if you're working out, right? If you're not working out, the creatine, it's not really going to make your muscles bigger. Once you get up to 10 grams, there was a study out of Germany showing that 10 grams, now you start to get spillover into the brain because your muscles are satisfied. It's starting to get into the brain. This study in Germany found that creatine levels were increasing in the brain after supplementing with 10 grams. And then other studies started to come out looking at when the brain is stressed, when it's under stress, like sleep deprivation. So people that were deprived of sleep for 24 hours, when they were supplementing with a high dose of creatine, when I say high dose, it was based on their weight, but ultimately it was somewhere between 20 to 25 grams that they took. They were able to not only, perform better than they would have, if they were sleep deprived. So they also were performing better than their baseline level before they were sleep deprived, which was crazy. It was a very small study. Nonetheless, other studies have come out looking at other types of stress on the brain. So one being dementia, mild cognitive decline. Those people that are given 10 or even 20 grams a day for a period of time, I don't remember, a few weeks, they also perform better on cognitive tests as well. So other studies, again, showing if you're stressing the brain, and there's another sleep deprivation study, but ultimately the take home here is that if your brain is stressed, it needs more creatine, and giving it more creatine because the energy, right? Stress is very energy consuming. And so you want to be able to replace that energy quicker. You make creatine in your brain, but you're only making 1 to 2 grams. And when you're stressed, you're going to need more than that, right? Same goes when you're stressing your muscles with force, with working out. You need to make more energy. My rationale is we live in a world now where there's lots of ways to stress your brain. There's financial stress, emotional stress, relationship stress. The work stress, right? There's sleep deprivation, all that stuff. So I sort of, and this is totally my extrapolation of, the data that actually are stressing the brain. I feel like my brain's constantly being stressed all the time, with work, with learning. It's very cognitive demand when you're trying to learn a bunch of science, being a mom, being a wife, there's a lot of things going on, right? and traveling and sleep. So my baseline now for creatine is 10 grams because I want it to get into the brain, and it could be totally placebo, but I feel the 10 grams, I don't get that energy slump like in the afternoon, later part of the day that I used to get. Like I'm just going even keel throughout the day. And if I don't have my 10 grams, I notice it. It could be placebo where I'm like, I didn't get that, who knows? It's working. It's working, right? And it
Have you
also,
tried a higher dosage than 10?
yeah. And so when I travel and I am, or if I don't get enough sleep, when I'm traveling, I usually don't get enough sleep. When I'm going to other time zones, definitely don't get enough sleep. I go up to 20, sometimes even 25 grams. And like I went to China recently, completely different part of the world, right? And I had to like the next morning after I arrived in the evening, and then the next day I had to give a talk. I mean, you got to be on game. You got to be ready, right? And so I did my 20 grams, and it seems to help with my jet lag and help me like be able to be mentally, cognizant and functioning peak. Again, it could be placebo where I'm thinking I'm just going to get it. And that's fine because creatine is pretty safe. And I don't do 20 grams every day. I do it in certain situations. So yes, I do go above 10 grams. My baseline is usually 10. And there's only certain scenarios, like if I'm sleep deprived or I'm traveling, when I go up to more than that. But it seems to work for me. And, it's, like I said, it's safe. And I feel like if it's placebo, it's fine. I don't think it's placebo. But I'm just saying that it could be.